Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be discussing the burgeoning field of cyber economics. Now, what is cyber economics? I'll be explaining all of that in this video and also be describing why it's so important, how it can impact the future, and what we can actually learn from this new age that we have. Now, the idea in regular economics is that any economy can be broken down into three categories: land, labor, and capital. This then allows for the creation of a PPF chart, or a production possibilities frontier chart, and the curves of indifference that arise from that. This basically is a method of predicting what an economy can produce, should produce, and in an ideal circumstance would produce. Now, this doesn't always mean that it will produce that or that it has to produce exactly according to that chart, but basically it's like a golden rule or like a rule of thumb where you can essentially predict what the ideal economic output of any nation would be based on what their resources are. So for example, if a country has a lot of land resources, it could be oil, could be gold, could be diamonds, whatever it is, then a lot of their economy theoretically should be a lot of that resource. Doesn't always track. Something like these Scandinavian countries have a lot of oil, but aren't necessarily major oil exporters, at least not predominantly within their economies. And the inverse can also be true as well, etc., etc. However, uh, this also applies to labor and capital. So if you have a labor force in your country that is extremely advanced, has a very good education rate, etc., something like Japan, then you're going to produce a lot of manufactured goods because you have a lot of labor and a lot of capability to produce that. So a good example of more recent countries that have gone into that category would be China. They have a massive labor force, highly industrialized, highly capable. Therefore, they produce literally the world's largest amount of industrial and manufactured goods. And that's because of their labor advantage. So their PPF chart would be heavily tilted towards labor products. And then same thing, obviously, for capital. I'm not going to go through a whole rigmarole for this one as well. But basically, capital, same thing. If you have a lot of money or you have a lot of capability to transfer money and transfer goods, then you're going to do that a lot. The Dutch are a good example, so that also applies. However, this is where it gets interesting because this is regular economics that I've told you so far. With regular land, labor, capital, three categories adds up into one economy. That's all, right? However, now we have digital equivalents to each of these. With land, we have virtual reality, where space is limitless as well as instantly traversable, and doesn't need to follow the laws of physics. This leads to a digital equivalent to land that is more scalable, more adaptable, and more able to create incredible experiences than real land, at least on paper. Now, obviously, there are still challenges with all of this technology. There's sensory perception not being the same. Things like HD video or 4K video still not really being able to replicate the exact same kind of feeling. The odd feeling of goggles on your face, etc., etc. But safe to say that the VR we have now is already quite good, and it's getting better and better every year. And realistically, people still will live on land, but the digital land is becoming stronger and stronger every single year, and that is a counterpole that has to be factored in and managed and figured out. Labor, we have artificial intelligence, which is able to do simple and repetitive tasks extremely well and quickly and cheaply. And although it struggles with more dynamic and complex tasks, especially ones that require empathy or emotional connection, this represents a huge shift in technology and economy still, since a lot of very menial, repetitive knowledge work can be automated away, which I think is something our society and societies in general have not really had to consider yet, since mostly our focus has been on removing physical work and physical repetition. A lot of the industrial technologies, even the ancient technologies of things like grain mills, water mills, windmills, all of those were designed to reduce physical menial labor, but not anything in terms of knowledge labor. However, at this point, I think that it's the same can be said and should be said about knowledge work as well. It can be just as menial, just as repetitive, just as annoying, just as grinding, if not more so than physical labor, because we're not really quite as evolved for that. We haven't had billions and billions of years of evolution to figure out exactly what movement is. We don't have that for thinking. So I would say knowledge work is going to be and should actually be automated in some level, but not in its entirety, not completely. And lastly, we have capital with cryptocurrency, as well as the other DeFi type technologies that exist. There's things like blockchains that are for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but there's also things like the um, interplanetary file system, which is IPFS, or with other decentralized, scalable technologies that are designed to move data and information around in a very non-centralized, decentralized, and free way. Now, this is probably the most obvious of all the three, so it's not the one that needs to be like said quite as much, but this reality also obscures the fact that it's probably going to be one of, if not the most impactful of them as well, since it can fund the development and creation of the other two. It's also worth noting that cryptocurrency can be more than just money, and it's really just an information and storage medium. So the aforementioned IPFS and other databases that can move information and knowledge around, those are all essentially money. Those are all essentially capital. Capital is very broad, by the way, just to give a more nuanced perspective. For anyone who hasn't heard of this distinction before with capital, labor, land, everything, and the way that economics distinguishes these three, capital is basically just investment. It's basically things like machinery also count as capital. So if you have industrial equipment that is like highly advanced, costs a lot of money, is very technical, is very difficult, is very like intensive, and requires investment, that's basically what capital is. It's essentially like long time scales. That's essentially what capital does, is just long time scale thinking and long term like planning and storage. Anything that can do that is capital. Anything that requires 30 years to pay off, something like a mortgage, something like a house, is actually capital for a lot of people. You can use that for a business, you can use that to develop on. There's a lot of things that you can do with that. So these are all forms of capital. And I think that world is absolutely exploding open right now because you have digital cryptocurrency, DeFi, IPFS, decentralized Tor network, Tor browser type technologies that just keep on dropping. I just heard about I2P. I2P, no idea if it's going to take off or not, but it seems to be like a Tor browser dark web competitor. So there's just all of these technologies absolutely pumping out every single day. So therefore, it stands to reason, as far as I'm concerned, that virtual economies are now completely possible, as well as a variety of hybrid virtual physical economies. Because if you have digital equivalents to each of the three categories of regular economics, then what do you have? You have digital economics, you have cyber economics. So where does this lead? Not exactly sure. However, here are some characteristics that we can actually guarantee just by the very nature of them being on the blockchain and virtualized and run by artificial intelligence and in VR and things like that. What we can guarantee is that since these virtualized and semi-virtualized economies are linked to networks by design, then PPF charts, indifference curves, and the like can be calculated in real time and updated without the need for central authority. And this will reduce government corruption and allows for citizens to update their economic choices on the fly rather than have that be a luxury only for the wealthy. Imagine if every single person could Google exactly what the inflation rate was, exactly what the money supply was, exactly what the top stocks and bonds were, exactly what everything was. It'd be an absolute gold mine. This would be a complete shift right now, by the way, because some might say, oh, but this is so unfair, and it wouldn't be good if people knew too much about the economy, which is so like subjective. Like anybody who would make that case, you should just ask them, like, okay, but where does the line end, right? Like, how is it good or how is it bad that you have this information? How is it better that you don't have the information? And also, much more like critically, how hypocritical is it that the rich people already have the information because they get to make the information, they get to collect the information. They're the ones who run credit card companies, they're the ones who run banks, etc., like that kind of thing, right? So now that kind of knowledge being held by everyone means that if you know what the inflation rate is, you can adjust accordingly. You can figure out, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't get my mortgage on a variable rate because the inflation is going to go up in the future, right? Maybe I should get a fixed rate. That alone is a big shift, you know? And the same thing can be said about other decisions like PPF charts and indifference curves. If you're about to sell a product, right, and you have to pay a certain amount of money for market research, why do that when you can just look up the indifference curves on average throughout the population? Instantly, small businesses can start to compete in ways that they couldn't before. They wouldn't have to put millions or even thousands of dollars into market research. They can just look it up. They can just figure out exactly what everyone's average indifference curve is looking like and know that they've got relatively good odds of making it in the market. These are things that should be possible in the future and probably are going to be done in the future, but are kind of in their burgeoning stages where they're not really being done a whole lot. So, what does this mean in the big picture? To bring this back into something a little more like concrete, right? Instead of having bureaucrats and regulators and shadowy deals and people who are corruptible and people who get emails stuck on their server and get emailed and get bribed, right? Instead of this whole like messy system that we have, which is the best that we have, to be fair, for sure. Like, not to completely dunk on the role of government. Like, they are technically the best that we have, but like the best that we have is pretty shit. And I think we could do a lot better, personally. I think deterministic, reversible, functional programming based algorithms, those kind of things are really like, not to even word salad people, but just like things that are completely written onto the contract and are guaranteed. Those are really going to be the future of finance. I think that's going to be really the future of the economy, and we should move as much as possible into figuring out what we can do to push that forward and to really gain some kind of like advantage and benefit and like change from that. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck with the same world leaders in heavy air quotes that we have right now. And they're not any better. They're actually like much, much worse. Like, I'd rather take a risk and take a gamble on what ChatGPT can do industrially and what Bitcoin can do financially and what VR can do physically than what any of these like regulators and bureaucrats can do on any day of the week. It's just a much better odds for us. So yeah, I think basically probably a variety of hybrid systems are going to be the best, by the way. I don't think fully living in like a digital like metaverse type bullshit is going to be a good idea. I don't think like Ready Player One type society is a good society. But I think hybrid physical digital is going to be something that takes over. I think that's going to be a big advantage for a lot of people. Imagine something like showing up to work with VR, or even something like not even full VR, but like holographic, multi-screen, 3 or 4 monitors, whatever. Like the amount that would be good enough for work and gives you enough bandwidth to get work done, but now you don't have to like show up to an office constantly. And the business doesn't have to buy an office constantly either. Like, it's kind of a win-win. So I would say the economy is going to shift. I think it needs to shift, and at this point they've got what's coming to them because they've built it so fragile at this point that our physical economy and our traditional economy is just not able to handle like any kind of overturning. And hopefully this digital future can be a better future for us. That's what I think. So, we'll be looking at some earlier examples of work in future videos. I'll be talking about tokenomics, automated industrial production, things like email and addressing space. All of that's going to be a future topic because it's too broad to fully discuss. But here's been my intro to cyber economics. Here's been the intro to digital real estate and digital finance, man. That's what's going on right now. So, see you guys next time. See you in the next video. Peace.